There once was a master craftsman who spent decades building the most beautiful house anyone had ever seen. Every plank was placed with care, every window positioned to catch the perfect light. Visitors would travel from distant lands just to stand before its magnificent walls and marvel at what human hands could create. The craftsman lived in this house for many years, proud of his creation, content in the rooms he had so carefully designed. But as seasons passed and storms came and went, he began to notice things. A draft that whispered through walls he thought were solid. Shadows that fell in corners where he had once planned for light to dance. Rooms that no longer fit the person he had become. One morning, the craftsman stood in his doorway and saw his house with new eyes. It was still beautiful, undeniably so. Others still praised its construction, still pointed to its strong foundation and elegant lines. But he could feel it in his bones. This house, perfect as it seemed to everyone else, no longer served the person he was becoming. His neighbors were horrified when he picked up his tools again. "Why would you change something so perfect?" they asked. "Why tear down what has taken you so long to build?" They could not understand that perfection and purpose are not always the same thing. They could not see that sometimes the strongest walls become the very barriers that keep us from growing. The craftsman smiled at their concern, his hands steady as he began to work. He was not demolishing his house out of anger or disappointment. He was not erasing his past or declaring his previous work worthless. Instead, he was honoring both who he had been and who he was becoming. He was choosing to build with intention rather than simply maintaining what already existed. As he carefully removed each board, he examined it. Some pieces were still strong and beautiful. These he set aside with reverence, knowing they would find new purpose in his reimagined home. Other pieces had served their time, but were no longer needed. These he released with gratitude, acknowledging how they had sheltered him when he needed them most. The work was not easy. Some days, standing among the organized chaos of his reconstruction, the craftsman felt vulnerable and exposed. The old house had been predictable, familiar. This new building required him to make fresh decisions every day, to trust his evolving vision even when he couldn't yet see the final result. But there was something different about this building process. When he had built his first house, he had been driven by proving what he could accomplish, by showing the world he was capable of creating something lasting. Now, he built from a deeper place, from knowing rather than needing to know, from strength rather than the need to appear strong. Visitors still came, but now they brought different questions. Instead of simply admiring the finished product, they wanted to understand the process. "How did you know it was time to rebuild?" they would ask. "How do you choose what to keep and what to release?" The craftsman would pause in his work, dust on his hands, and consider their questions carefully. "The house was never broken," he would explain, "but I was no longer the same person who had built it. The house served its purpose perfectly. It taught me what I was capable of creating. But now I know not just what I can build, but what I want to build." As the seasons turned, the new house began to take shape. It incorporated the best elements of the original design, but with spaces the craftsman had never dared to imagine before. There were rooms for solitude and rooms for gathering, windows positioned, not just for beauty, but for the specific quality of light he had learned he needed to thrive. The foundation was deeper now. Built on bedrock the craftsman had discovered only by digging beneath what he thought was already solid ground. The walls were both stronger and more flexible, designed to weather storms, while still allowing for future growth and change. Some visitors preferred the original house they remembered from stories. They spoke wistfully of its familiar comfort. The craftsman listened with kindness, understanding that his old house had meant something to them too, had perhaps inspired their own building projects. But he did not build for the comfort of those who would only visit. He built for the person who would live within these walls every day, who would wake each morning surrounded by the evidence of conscious choice rather than inherited pattern. The day came when the craftsman set down his tools and stepped back to survey his work. The house was complete, though he knew now that completion was not a permanent state, but a moment of satisfaction before the next phase of growth would inevitably arrive. He walked through each room, touching walls he had built not once, but twice, first from necessity, then from wisdom. The house felt both entirely new and deeply familiar, like coming home to a place he had always been traveling toward, but had never seen. That evening, as golden light streamed through windows, positioned with hard-earned knowledge of exactly where the sun would fall, the craftsman understood something profound. His turning point had not been about admitting failure or starting over from emptiness. His turning point had been recognizing that he was finally strong enough to hold both his history and his vision. And in that understanding, he realized the most beautiful truth of all. This would not be his last turning point. There would be other seasons of rebuilding, other moments when his growing spirit would require new spaces to inhabit. But now he knew the secret. Turning points are not interruptions to the building process. They are the building process itself. For in the end, we are all craftsmen of our own becoming, always working with the materials of our experience, always choosing between building from habit and building from hope. And when we are finally strong enough to choose hope, that is when the real construction begins.